Hi everybody, it's Annette from the Art of Intuition, and today we're going to talk about relationships with parents. This can also be any relationship though with any kind of blood connection we have. We're going to kind of focus on that today. So it can be siblings, but I want to kind of keep it on parents for just the broader explanation. You can relate it to how it feels appropriate for you. There's going to be parts of our journey where we disconnect from a lot of our blood family, which can be sort of a jarring part for us, especially if we were very close to our blood family. Some of us weren't. So when we start kind of pulling away, it feels like a kind of a natural progression for us because we kind of need to get in a different place with those relationships, and we can't move the relationship forward by staying kind of in it in the same way. It also can be a way for us to kind of stand on our own 2 feet if we haven't done that without our parents. It can also be a way for us to just part of the disconnecting from all the external stuff to connect with ourselves inside. It's kind of a part of that process too. So it can feel, and it can be a lot of judgment and guilt there that we have to work through, and we start to pull away from kind of blood relatives, blood family. And then and we're also releasing our attachment to a lot of that stuff, and our identities, our roles, and what role we were playing in those. Especially when you get into parents, you're kind of into the divine child, or more into the human child. And then we're going to kind of move a little bit more into divine child, kind of by ourselves, and kind of rediscovering ourselves without our parents there. And then there's just kind of this part of the process where you kind of start to see your parents as not your parents anymore. And that's kind of where I want to focus. And like I said, this can be with any kind of blood relation, because we start to kind of pull away from the blood family. We get more connected with our soul family, even though technically our blood family is our soul family because we chose them all. And when you're in your human consciousness, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that feels this way, when you're doing a lot of human realities, and even when you're in some of your higher realities and you're clearing a lot and it's not going the way you thought it was going to go, sometimes you just want to talk to your mother, or you just want to talk to your father, because there's just something about hearing that voice, that aspect of you, that just makes you feel like it's going to be okay. I can always call dad and it's going to be okay. I can always call my mom, and, no matter how rough this is for me, mom still loves me and it's going to be okay. And there is kind of a safety net in that. And there comes a time when we start to see our parents, especially when we start to see them aging and they start going through kind of their own transitioning processes. You start seeing different health things pop up for them. Some of them, it could be them starting to leave and they're going to transition to their next chapter, just like kind of we all transition to our next chapters. And it kind of makes us sort of detach from them more and those relationships. And when you start going through kind of facing your parents' mortality, and that's kind of a little bit where this is going to go, it is a big clearing for us. It's a big ancestral clearing for us. It's a big kind of letting go of mom and dad can fix it. And it's us sort of letting go of that version of us, in a sense, that played the child and who would show up in that role, that family dynamic, that family role we had in human consciousness. And a lot of all these journeys are kind of, like we pick our parents, we pick all this stuff. So everything that happens, if you're talking about that child-parent dynamic, or once again, any blood really relative, it doesn't really matter. You start to kind of have a lot of attachments to that. You have a certain role you played in that. And when all that starts to shift and you get to certain parts of your journey where you're going to be asked to show up for, if it is your parents, show up as a higher aspect of yourself and not show up as their child. And that causes a lot of ancestral clearing for us to do, because we have to show up on a different level. We have to show up on a level that when you're dealing with those relationships, we have to go through a lot of clearing before we can even show up like that. So when we start getting into the deep ancestral stuff, we start releasing the attachments to our parents as our parents, and start dropping those identities and start looking at them as another soul, and being able to respect their journey as a soul without compromising ours, especially when we start seeing different health things they start going through. Because we really have to look at that point of what is my role here. Just like you would look at your role in any reality you're in, you have to take kind of the parent card out of it in a sense and really look at what's my role here. How can I show up in the highest possible space for them without the attachments, which really means you don't have the agenda anymore. There's no way, when you don't have an attachment, you don't have an agenda. You're there, people are in your life, and it's a bonus, but they don't have to be there. And if they're there, that's awesome. And that's when you can show up in your purest aspects and show up as a higher self for them and look at the role you're going to play in that reality. And a lot of times it's not the role, pretty much it's never going to be the role you would have played in a human consciousness reality with them. In the same situation, you would show up differently. You would show up in a different way, because you have to also honor their journey and the choices they make along that journey, and not try to hold on to them because you have a need for them and you have a story around why they have to always be there. Because a lot of times with their parents, like I said earlier, you just kind of want to know they're there. No matter what you're going through, you just kind of want to know they're there. And whoever that person is for you, you're gonna feel that energetic, well, but I just want them to be here, and I don't really, that's because it's our need. And we have to start looking at whoever is feeling that for us, look at it within ourselves, kind of fill that for ourselves. And we're going to go through a lot of clearing, a lot of deep ancestral clearing when we start to see this stuff. And they will be going through the same thing. They might not consciously know that's what they're doing, but like I said, all these journeys line up. You're in a certain part, they're going to be in a certain part, because they're going to assist you when it's time for you to clear that part. And that was their agreement. And that's what they said they were going to do. Now, the question is, can you show up? Can we show up as our higher selves, not as the child? How do we show up? What's our role? And really look at that. And if you can't figure out what your role is, what's the highest role you can do in the reality to support them? Set with it. Don't make a decision right away that you got to fly in and try to fix everything, or try to make it something that it might not be aligned for it to be. Really set with it. And let's say you were planning to move across country and all of a sudden you feel like, oh, I can't go now because my parents are ill or my sister's ill or whatever it is. And I'm going to, or starting a transition or whatever it's going to be. They need me to be here. That's when you really have to look at, those are the decisions that we have to make from not our human consciousness, and clear any guilt and judgment we have around that reality and what's our role there. Is it highest line for us to move farther away instead of moving closer, where maybe that's what you would have done in a human consciousness? You're going to support them in a different way by supporting humanity in a different way. And there still is roles you can play in that reality. It just might not have been the original role you thought you were going to play. So really look at that. It's not going to be the easiest part of our ascension. We start getting into a lot of this ancestral stuff and looking at those types of relationships, because they do kind of have so much ingrained in them and so much attachment in them that we have to start to sever all of that. And that's why a lot of the times when in the beginning, we start distancing, because we start doing that process. But then when you kind of get faced with more realities and how their realities are changing, and you have to be able to look at them as souls like you would look at anybody else. And there can be a lot of clearing that has to go along with us being able to do that. And a lot of us are kind of in those moments right now. So just look at what your role can be and let the clearing come up. Don't fight how you feel about it. Don't fight and try to push all that stuff down. You want to get all that stuff out of your body, release all that stuff. Really look at it. And don't have any judgment on what you're looking at, and why you might want them to stay around. You might have the most restorative reason you want your parents to be there forever. And you're just like, I can't believe I really feel that way. But you have to understand that's just the human programming coming up. It's just the human story coming up. So look at what your role is in that moment. And that's going to constantly shift. You're not always going to have the same role, the same thing you're going to always do. It's always going to be a little bit different as to what you're going to be doing for them, to support them in that reality, and to show up with pure compassion for the reality they're going through, without showing up with all your agenda with it as to why you're there. And sometimes supporting them in what's highest line might not be what someone else might look at as you supporting them in what's highest line. But we kind of have to get over that judgment, because if we feel that judgment, it's just our own judgment. So, okay. Keep practicing the art of intuition.